All right, that's the tough part over with. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for making time for our event today. We have two groups coming together. As you can tell, we have a group of folks with Rob Kelly, my co-founder, that are on our online virtual platform to network as well as to share this content with you. And these are folks that are from across our network in Canada, the United States. And thank you very much for making the trip through LA traffic, and also for those who traveled from Toronto and other markets to be with us today. Really appreciate that. And a special thank you to RSM for hosting us. We really value our membership and partnership together, and looking forward to a great morning. For those of you who I haven't met online or in person, my name is Stephen Armstrong. I'm the co-founder of Maple, and together with Robert Kelly online today, we're excited to bring this Southern California hybrid winter reception to you. And for some of you, this is your first event, so you're going to learn a little bit about the background of Maple today, and then we'll be focusing on our special presentations. So hopefully you had some good networking online or in person this morning. It's always a struggle because we hate to break up networking as it's happening because there's such good value there, but we also have some terrific content to share with you. So Rob and I are going to give you a little update on Maple and kind of look back at 2022 and the growth of our community, celebrating new members, past events and content. And then we'll turn the Maple podium over today first to Tate Turner, who is with us from San Francisco. Tate is a investment advisor with Invest Alberta, and is going to be profiling the Alberta market for us. And after Tate's presentation, we'll be hearing from Delilah Panio from the Toronto Stock Exchange, talking about venture capital opportunities with the TSX Venture Exchange and the TSX as the unique dual exchange structure. And then we'll wrap up with some just brief updates on what's coming for Maple early in 2023. As I mentioned, our group online was enjoying some Southern California pool weather. I'm glad it's not raining today. I'm also glad that when we scheduled this, not knowing the World Cup schedule, that we're not competing with Lionel Messi today. So we'll have you out before the next match starts later this morning. Before I turn it over to Rob, just a brief word about our mission. So we're a California nonprofit. We founded Maple in 2015 with the objective of promoting bilateral trade, investment, and entrepreneurship collaborations between, at the time, Southern California and Canada. And that mission has grown now to welcome other chapters across Canada and across the United States. We're a B2B focused organization, from startups to enterprise organizations. Our playbook is really to bring us together in events like today to network and to also learn from one another through the presentations that our members share. We've also led delegations to Vancouver and to Toronto in past years. And we've built some pretty interesting storytelling platforms that help our members talk about your work, your perspectives, editorialize, insights that can help inform and educate our members as they look to grow their businesses in Canada and the United States. And our work is a reflection not only of our wonderful membership, but also the partners that we've worked with over the years, including here in Los Angeles, World Trade Center Los Angeles, the LA EDC, City of Long Beach, among others. And probably the most valuable partnership we have, and kind of the reason for being for Maple, is the Canadian consulate here in Los Angeles. I'm honored to have Jerome and Laurence with us from the consulate. Thank you very much. But it was the consulate that reached out back in 2014 to say, you know, we'd like to see if there would be a B2B that could form here that would help promote Canadian Southern California business ties, and Maple came from that inspiration. We're a community for individuals as well as for organizations and institutions. So as you see on our posters, there's quite a breadth of members that reflect quite a diversity of business sectors and markets as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-founder, Robert Kelly. And Rob, I'll be your slide advancer for you, and take it over from here.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. I couldn't bring myself to putting a jacket on when I'm not leaving my office. So So no jacket for me. Anyway, so thanks everyone for joining. Rob Kelly, for those of you who I haven't met or didn't meet in the virtual environment, as Stephen mentioned, co-founded Maple Business Council with Stephen back in 2015. This is a shot of our first event. It was at an IP law firm by the name of Kenobi Martins. We did this in June of 2015, and now we're a community of over 50 members, member organizations, and 125 members across 26 markets. So, we're just really grateful for the support that we've received from the community, and continue to welcome new members and look for great opportunities to help each other. Next slide there, Stephen. It's a growing network, and as we started in Southern California, we took on Orange County, Los Angeles, and San Diego as our sort of starting market, and it's a pretty large market if you think about it, just in terms of scale. So we really wanted to get the playbook built here in Southern California first, and then we moved into to taking some programming up into BC and Vancouver in 2017. We launched our chapter in New York in 2020 during the early days of the pandemic. We also converted our Vancouver programming events into a full-fledged chapter in 2020. And then you probably have seen recently we launched the Ontario and the Colorado chapters of the council this year. So we're thrilled to finally be putting some more maple leaves on the map, and looking forward to more. So just quickly walking through the chapters. So Toronto, we were thrilled to have Bernardine Pereira, who had since the early days of the council in Southern California, used to come to our events on a quarterly basis. And so we had Bernardine Pereira from Pereira Wealth Advisory Services, member of Raymond James Limited, come and join us as our executive director for the Toronto chapter. She's a past president of the Estate Planning Council of Toronto in the past, and has past leadership in the Toronto LGBTQ plus community. So thrilled to have Bernardine. And we launched it, the chapter with an in-person event. We had a great turnout in Toronto. And it was lovely to get get our speakers out in person, but also just bring out the community to give us a warm welcome in Toronto. In Vancouver, since meeting Jason on a mission that we took to Vancouver in I guess it was 2017, we had Jason sort of raise his hand and finally in 2020 launch the chapter. And so we've now seen 2 years of activity in the Vancouver, British Columbia area. Jason is executive director of cargo development at YVR. And he's led a delegation to Vancouver from Southern California and a city delegation from Long Beach. And this year we did something really interesting, where we partnered with the U.S. Commercial Service to host an InvestTech Select USA event for area tech companies, and we had 5 Maple members present at that. So thanks to Jason for that. Then on to Colorado. So in Denver, Rob Mancy, an Ontario native from Canada and resident of Colorado since '96. Rob is a CEO of Avenue West, so he does corporate relocations. He's also the chairman and president of the Canada-Colorado Association. And what's interesting about this is that they were looking to add more of a business-to-business angle to what the CCA was doing, and rather than try to create their own thing, they saw the model in Maple, also through Derek Godfrey, who was from Southern California, moved out there recently. Sort of saw this model as one that just made sense. Rather than roll their own, they decided to join us. And so Rob is leading that new chapter for us in Colorado. Our launch was a great turnout in Colorado. We had a fabulous turnout from the community and great support from the consulate, as well as past ambassador of Canada to the United States as well. So this was great, and you can watch the replays of this session. Some great talks as well. So appreciate that. New York. So New York was the one that, so John has been at it for a couple of years. It was the first one that we launched virtually. John has done a fabulous job, launching and growing this chapter during the pandemic. He's the former president of Purolator International. And when he went into sort of active retirement out of leaving Purolator, reached out and said, hey, this is something I'd like to try and figure out with you guys. And I think we've done a great job with John at the helm in New York. And the membership is growing, engagement is growing with the regional economic development groups and other sort of cross-border organizations. So thank you, John, for all that you're doing for us in in New York. So one of the things that we said from day one was we're going to be member sort of growth stage agnostic and sector agnostic, and we want to get people from across the US and Canada. And I think these two charts, which are eye charts, there are larger versions in the room for you guys to look at, but clearly the message here is we're trying to be very broad in terms of the network that we create, so that you can sort of get out of your swim lanes, as Stephen likes to refer to it, and talk to people in other sectors. And so we think that that has been great.
Great.
So with that, back to Stephen. Thanks, everyone. And for anyone online, if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A.
Thank you, Rob. So I'm just going to quickly highlight some of the new members in 2022, and it reflects the diversity of our membership. Stream Realty Partners, commercial real estate. They do over $4 billion a year in transactions. Roland is a subsidiary of a Japanese company. You might know the name from musical instruments. Roland DGA here in the US is focused on wide format printing and die cutting technologies. A US business that's growing rapidly in Canada. EcoRaster is a really interesting product from Germany that is a permeable paving solution product that helps manage stormwater runoff for roads, warehouses, parking lots. They do a lot of work in public and private sectors out of Listowel, Ontario, in southwestern Ontario. And they joined. Challenger Motor Freight out of Cambridge, Ontario, is one of the largest privately held freight forwarders at shipping companies. And they came on board as a corporate member this year. On the organization front, really proud to have Invest Alberta with us as an organization member and to have the presentation today. Export Development Canada also joined earlier this year, and their directors are located in Alberta and Atlanta, and I believe Chicago and Montreal, that are directly involved with our community. As I mentioned, we also have individual members, Marco Mavila with the Bank of the West here in Los Angeles. Mike Stope is the founder of Pacer Air Freight in Mississauga, Ontario, outside of Toronto. They do specialized freight solutions for medical devices and other products. Sapan Samzadeh is a former LA building commissioner, originally from Toronto. And he's got a very interesting technology company here. He sends drones up skyscrapers to measure energy loss, and then is using a specialized software from Canada that calculates the cost to the building owner of that energy loss. And so he's taking his solution across the US. And then, as Rob mentioned, we just launched Maple, Colorado in Denver. And at that meeting, we were happy to announce our first Colorado chapter member, Terry Romano, who is the president of HydroDig. They do hydrovac solutions for construction. And they're headquartered in Alberta. Their US office is in Denver. And they have, I think, 37 field offices across Canada. We also are a community for young professional members as well. And Kristen Rose Pike is the founder, CEO of Northern Rose Spirits. She's joined our New York chapter recently. She's sourcing artisanal distilled products from the Maritimes and Quebec primarily, and importing them to New York State currently. finding really interesting distilled to bring to this market, and has a real passion for that sector. So she actually spoke last week at our event in New York. And we have Andrew here today. Andrew, where are you? Oh, there you are. So thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us. Andrew's from London, Ontario originally, and is a trust in the state's attorney in Pasadena with KGM Law Partners. So just briefly, it's more than just networking. It's about us having the opportunity to tell our stories with each other. And we've built a couple of content platforms to help our members do that, with an audience and the ability to take your thoughts and put it in a way that our members and our followers on social media and our subscribers to our newsletters can enjoy as well. One of these is our Conversations video series, and we work with our members to take your message, distill it down into a couple episodes, each of about 2.5 minutes long. We put that out to our followers on social media. We archive it on our websites. You have access to the content to share as well. And we've done over 60 episodes now since starting this video series a few years ago. Lynette Tremblay is the Chief Operating Officer of Invest Alberta. Had a great conversation with her earlier this year. John Griffin from Toronto is President of Sterling Capital Brokers, the largest independent benefits consulting firm in Canada now. Mike Coates, the co-CEO of EcoRaster that I spoke of, and Brian Bernhoff from Dallas is the Managing Director of QA Consultants. And we have Bill Clages here from QA locally, and they're one of the largest software testing companies in North America. We did an interesting series in July with Knobe Martins, and Knobe is a long-term charter member of Maple, an IP law firm, and we spoke with 2 of their partners about managing your IP the right way and how to work with your IP law firm effectively. And we looked at it from a couple perspectives: growing and scaling your business, and what should you be asking of your IP law firm, and what are some of the do's and don'ts. And then with Marco Zoretic, we talked about the time when you might be in litigation, either as a plaintiff or defendant, and how do you manage that relationship with the law firm when you're facing some of those challenges. And both Harnick and Marco are from Ontario, Canada, and work in the Orange County office of Knobe Martins. The other content platform we built out is Momentum, and it's a monthly e-publication that goes out to about 3,000 executives across Canada and the United States. And it's typically 2 pieces of content each month. It could be an interview, editorial piece, perspectives. We had the pleasure of interviewing Consul General Susan Crystal of the US Consulate in Toronto, and she talked about the mission of her office and her journey to Canada from the US. Earlier this year, we ran an editorial from Scotty Greenwood, who is the founder of the Canadian American Business Council, talking about the opportunities for Canada on the global stage these days. And Pierre Cleroux, the chief economist for the Business Development Bank of Canada, wrote about the current business environment as it relates to trade. So the articles are different each month in terms of the topic focus. And just like our meetings, we have different areas of expertise to share on a regular basis. A couple of years ago, we challenged ourselves to look at this focus on bilateral trade, investment, and entrepreneurship through a DEI lens. You know, how can we give more attention and voice to people that might be representing communities that don't get enough airtime? And one of the things we've done this year is to help thought leaders share their messages through our Momentum e-publication. So on the left, Ivy Arias is based here in Los Angeles. She's the founder of Brand LA. And she helps minority-owned businesses share their voice effectively with their audiences. Paola Maria Avila, to her right, is based in Vancouver. She founded Latincouver, and this is an organization to celebrate the diverse Latin communities in the province. And she talked about her journey from Colombia to Kentucky to Montreal, and then found her home in Vancouver. Stephanie Lapierre is in Toronto. She's the founder of Tealbook, and a very successful company that helps businesses manage their suppliers and their supply chains. And she challenged people to supply chain and their supplier database, and how can you be promoting greater diversity through who you choose to do business with. And then most recently, we had a wonderful article from Olena Poliski in Vancouver, who migrated from the Ukraine to Canada in the 90s. And she talked about what it was like to come to Canada as an immigrant and to be a woman entrepreneur in technology, and the challenges that she faced it. And it was a very personal story, and I think very brave of her to share the goods and the bad of that experience. And she is doing very well with her technology company, which is Art One Translations, which helps software companies globalize their platforms. And then most recently, not on this slide, we had an opportunity to celebrate the culture of RSM through the employee network groups. And one of the marketing managers here wrote about the way this company, RSM, helps their staff and their team recognize the strengths of the diversity that make up this company. And we were able to include that profile in a recent issue as well. So all this content now is available for anybody to access on a second website that we launched in May this year called Cross-Border, its focus is Cross-Border Insights. And it's really a living library of interviews, videos, articles, collected from our platforms for people to take advantage of and learn from. And I think it's one of the largest of its kind. We launched the site with over 100 pieces of content, and it's probably grown by 25% since then. So with that, I'm going to now introduce our first speaker. And it's my pleasure to introduce Tate Turner from Invest Alberta. And I'll just give a little bit of background on Tate. With a background in cross-border sales and marketing across a variety of sectors, Tate has spent the past 8 years as trade representative for the UK government, the province of British Columbia, and Invest Alberta in San Francisco. With British Columbia, he attracted over $200 million in FDI projects, including the likes of Eventbrite, Postmates, Brex, and Asana. With the UK, he attracted 18 new fintech investors, including the likes of Robinhood, Coinbase, WePay, and Revel. He's led on US visits from members of parliament, the Financial Conduct Authority, the Payment Systems Regulator, BC Innovation Commissioner, and multiple technology trade missions to San Francisco that have resulted in over $50 million of export value for participating companies. In previous roles, he's built the sales process and executed entire sales operations for businesses in residential real estate, software development, and sustainability data management. Tate, I'll turn it over to you. And you're all set. You might want to come around this way here.
All right, the camera should be facing the camera.
Yeah, and just watch the cables.
Yeah, sure. Do you have some notes here so I don't lose my train of thought? So thanks, Stephen. I appreciate the introduction. I'll talk to you guys. The main message of the day is letting you know that Invest Alberta is here in the US. We just grown our US team this year. I want to talk about our value proposition and how we're approaching selling foreign direct investment into Alberta. But before I do that, I want to explain my background a little bit because you might hear a Southern twang coming out of my voice, and it might be confusing why a gentleman from the Southeastern United States is talking to you about Alberta from the podium today in Los Angeles. The early part of my career was cross-border sales and marketing. It ranged basically from residential real estate to software development. I spent a lot of time in the Atlanta area, 3 years on the ground, first boots on the ground for a software development agency in London, which led me to the Bay Area where I currently live in 2014. And that was my first foray into economic development. I worked with the British government on a project there in sustainability, ended up transitioning to covering their fintech and venture capital file. From 2014 to 2017, super interesting time to be in that space. And then I was approached by Trade and Invest British Columbia to represent them on the ground in San Francisco with some colleagues doing their FDI attraction into BC, mainly Vancouver. The point in telling you that, as I joined Invest Alberta in August of this year, but the point in telling you those other two stories is that, fintech and VC into London, pretty natural fit. Fast-growing tech companies, software development engineering offices in Vancouver, pretty natural fit. Invest Alberta has a unique story to tell and a diverse story to tell. It's one about decarbonizing their grid, diversifying their economy. And so I think that's what attracted me to this role. I know that Alberta hasn't really had a forward-facing approach in terms of foreign direct investment attraction over the years. Now they do, hiring new resources throughout the US and throughout the world and growing at a fair clip. So that explains the accent, how I got here, how I'm talking to you this morning about Alberta. I'm talking to Canadians about Canada, which is coming from an American. So you're probably telling you stuff that you already know, but we might as well run through it because we're all here. So Alberta is a province in Western Canada, everybody. BC is just to the west and Saskatchewan's just to the east. It's about 800 miles north to south, 400 miles east to west. Banff, Jasper National Park, Those are things that people usually identify with, obviously Calgary and Edmonton as well. The high-level economy has always been based off of hydrocarbons, petrochemicals, cattle, and agriculture. Their oil and gas sector accounts for almost 15% of Canada's GDP, also known as a economic powerhouse in Canada. Estimated to grow at a pretty fair clip this year, faster than most competing jurisdictions. And so Invest Alberta, I want to tie in what we've done in 2 years. For those of you, we're no small part of this growth. And for those of you familiar with economic development, understand that if you're going to use the term sales cycle to describe engaging with a client, it takes a long time to find their interest, generate their interest, help them through the quote unquote sales process, and close a deal and bring it to your jurisdiction. Sometimes it can take up to 18 months. So we're a new organization. We've only been here 2 years, but added 10,000 jobs and $20 billion of investment. I'll name drop some companies that we've worked with along the way. But it's pretty impressive, and it shows no sign of slowing down. Alberta does have a very forward-facing approach now, which we'll talk about on certain key sectors. I'm eager to hear your feedback on this presentation and what you're hearing in market. We would lean heavily on service providers to answer some of the more technical parts of what our clients need, both as referral partners and vice versa. Works both ways. Our engagement on projects can range, to be quite honest with you. We could work pretty heavily on a 10-person engineering office that's going into Calgary that we think could have a dramatic impact on one of our key sectors, all the way up to a $100 million food processing manufacturing facility, to a capital investment from a VC in a Silicon Valley looking into a startup in Calgary or Edmonton or somewhere else in Alberta. So it's nuanced, it's varied, the types of projects. We tend to focus on some key sectors, which I'll talk about, but it's different for every client. So I just wanted to communicate that. And we do engage at various points along the decision-making process. If you're putting yourself in the shoes of the client, I obviously want to be in their office when they start thinking about Canada or international expansion. That's not always the case. It doesn't happen like that perfectly every single time, because you want to influence that decision-making process, but we do get in midstream and sometimes even on later stream, provided that we can add value. All right, so this is an important slide, especially for this audience, because a lot of you in the room are partners and service providers and people that I would refer to as multipliers. And you'll see how we partner with you along in your journey on this slide. And there are 6 blue boxes along the top. The first 2, I'd say, as an in-market business development rep and investment attraction advisor, are awareness and engagement. Let's say that's where I spend 50% of my time in market. It's about pounding the chest of Alberta, hosting events, supporting what Global Affairs Canada is doing conference work, hosting delegations, meeting with people such as yourself to keep an ear to the ground and understand what's happening, especially in our market in the Bay Area. A lot of it's built off of relationships and knowing who's doing what at a specific time. You move on to the evaluator investor. So think about those first 2 as the top of the sales pipeline. We're filling and talking to companies to get feedback on why they would or wouldn't choose Alberta, reporting back, finding ones that are genuine leads, and then encouraging the investor evaluation and decision, which I lump into basically a due diligence visit to market. That's when we step in and the conversation has become a little bit more serious. We set them up with connections on the ground in Alberta. We utilize our team on the ground and all their expertise in these 9 boxes below to help find them the right contacts to talk to, the right government agencies, the right private industry leaders, the right thought leaders, all that kind of stuff that's relevant to their sector and their business to make sure it's a good fit. Oftentimes refer to this less as selling the client on your jurisdiction rather than accelerating their decision-making process to whether or not it's a good fit or not. You don't want someone in your jurisdiction if it's not a good fit. So that's the due diligence trip. And then the implementation and aftercare part, that's when HQ engages in a long-term relationship after someone has made the decision, help them retain talent, help them grow, look for new opportunities within the province and maybe within Canada as well. And the 9 orange boxes you see at the bottom, I think that's a testament to the diversity of the team that we have in across the world and in Alberta. I mean, we have specialists coming from the world of policy, business development, tech, venture capital, government. So whatever the challenge of the company is finding, whatever pain point we discover that a company is having, we hope to be able to answer it through our team and through our connections in Alberta. So our team is growing at a fair clip. Speaking from the U.S. point of view, we've added resources in Seattle, 2 in San Francisco, 1 in Houston, and we're looking at New York and Chicago later this year. We have a pretty strong footprint in Europe, soon to be the Middle East and Asia as well. Like I said earlier, it shows no sign of slowing down. Invest Alberta's forward-facing approach is in full steam ahead mode, if you want to call it that. And we're now down here in LA. I'm based in the Bay Area, but planning to visit to LA frequently. So happy to connect with you should you want to. So let's talk a little bit about the Alberta advantage. Why Alberta? So 3 points here. I'm going to skip cost to do a business and go to speed and ease of doing business. So on speed, Alberta is known for being a business-friendly jurisdiction, big on cutting red tape, even at the municipal level when it comes to streamlined permitting processes. And we have a minister of red tape reduction. I know that's not novel in Canada, but it surely is novel to me when I discovered that. So that attracts companies, it attracts multinationals that I'll talk about a little bit later to open up offices here in a pretty grand way. But there's also this ease of doing business. It's a very collaborative business culture, and it's a roll up your sleeves and get it done attitude in Alberta. I think the people reflect its attractiveness pretty well. It's very much a can-do attitude, oftentimes referred to as Texas of the North. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. But in anecdotally, the economic development agencies that I work with on the ease of doing business part, like Calgary Economic Development, Edmonton Global, and some other smaller municipalities, they treat it as a rising tide floats all boats. So if it's not a perfect fit for your jurisdiction, we just want the project to land in Alberta to increase the diversification of the economy. And it's a team forward approach. So back to cost real quick. I don't think it's necessarily the best argument to compete on cost or incentives when you're trying to attract someone to a new jurisdiction because you get them for the wrong reasons. That being said, in today's world, we think this is a very compelling argument, especially for Alberta. And the diaspora we've seen in the US in the COVID days, especially in San Francisco, I can speak from experience. People have moved to mid-major cities like Boise and Bozeman and Nashville and Asheville, and Miami has been a big boon. So you have seen a diaspora. We think the same thing is at play with Alberta, with a lower cost of life, higher quality of living, a lovely place to live, more days of sunshine than anywhere else in Canada. And we generally tend to be the lowest jurisdiction for operating across the board in North America. And we have the most competitive tax structure. Someone referenced that in the networking, that's what I was pointing at. Competitive tax system, 8% corporate tax rate, 15% personal tax rate, no sales tax. So we think, and there are incentives that are available, and those that usually don't come about until later on in the conversation when we have an in-depth relationship with someone. But we think this is a compelling argument and why Alberta is poised to grow even faster than we expect. On to the talent piece. We do have an unparalleled ability to attract, produce, and retain talent. Two good anecdotes about doing this at the very early stages of talent production would be Olds College ag tech specific program, where they're taking technological applications, applying it to a legacy industry such as agriculture, and training these 18 to 22-year-olds to think this way in the future. And we'll talk a little bit about agriculture later and get into the details of what certain sectors are going well in Alberta, but that's certainly a good example. And then what University of Alberta has been doing in the machine learning and AI space for over 30 years. I had no idea this was going on before I joined Invest Alberta, but it's certainly something that we want to pound the chest of. They have cutting edge research coming out in that sector and are producing tons of talent. So two good anecdotes about the talent that we're growing. It plays in well because we have the youngest workforce in Canada. So back to the cost argument, if you have the youngest workforce in Canada and you want to attract a younger workforce to focus on the technological applications to legacy industries, a lower cost of housing, lower cost of rental units certainly bodes well for attracting people into the province and growing that talent. Most post-secondary institutions, have a footprint in some of our smallest communities. And the way I think about this is if we're in the world of a remote hiring strategy narrative, however you want to describe it, which I think is here to stay, post-COVID kind of introduced this, be it hybrid, be it hub and spoke model or fully remote. You want your post-secondary institutions in those small communities so that companies can find talent in major metropolitan areas. So we think that's a really good bonus for that. We have research centers and centers of excellence from the likes of Rogers, IBM, and EY. We have about 100,000 tech workers in the province right now. And Alberta at a high level being recognized for cutting red tape. This specifically, that the cutting red tape argument has attracted multinational investments from multinationals such as Infosys and Amazon as well. Another good example is our fintech regulatory sandbox. By no means a novel concept. I think the FCA's had one in place for 7 years, but it shows that we're thinking about the future in this world of peer-to-peer online value transfer, aka cryptocurrency. It's a very weird world, but the sandbox is a place where we can invite people in, test their products out with a fear of the long over the law coming in and telling them what they're doing is selling unregistered securities or something like that. And then Infosys, we just made an announcement with Infosys, the IT India giant. They're opening up a center of excellence around quantum. So you're hearing themes around agriculture, AI, fintech, quantum, and these are building that talent pipeline for problems that will be here in 3 to 10 years, if not already. On to energy. So obviously, legacy industry in Alberta. It's been what the Alberta economy has been based on. Some of the minds of decision makers across the world. I think the most interesting part of energy in Alberta today, from what I can gather, is that the legacy industry is leading the way in the search for the replacement of fossil fuels or new sources of energy. Specifically, the big opportunities in Alberta right now around low-cost hydrogen, carbon capture storage, and renewables, specifically wind and solar. That all being said, fossil fuels probably aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Alberta accounts for most of the foreign oil imports that go into the U.S., but we're at the same time thinking about the future and how to diversify away from that. So I think it's an encouraging sign. We got the talent in the industry sector to be a world leader in this space, and certainly think that that industry is not going away anytime soon. Examples of the evolution of industry coming from foreign jurisdictions would be Pace Solar setting up two new solar farms and wind projects from the likes of Enbridge and IKEA. Alberta was also the first regional government in North America to commit to a methane emissions reduction target for the oil and gas sector, and it's a key player in attracting wind and solar projects, with estimated 83% of those solar projects going to be based in Alberta in Canada from here to 2025. So the theme of what I've been saying here is technological applications to an existing skill set that we have. And I certainly think that's the case with energy. And I also think that's the case with agriculture. So ag tech, agriculture, new plant proteins, alternative proteins, whatever you want to call it. Alberta has a certain role to play here. You might notice this bottom bullet point, SVG Ventures, which is a Los Gatos-based VC firm, recently established a center of gravity in Alberta about 18 months ago. I was on the BC end competing against them, and I lost to Alberta on that project, but super happy to be on the Alberta end now supporting their work being done in that space. They have an MOU with Olds College working on that ag tech program. They are investing in early stage ag tech companies to help them grow in Alberta and across Canada as well. Plant proteins. So Alberta is a larger producer of pulse crops, think peas, chickpeas, lentils, stuff like that. They can also be broken down in alternative proteins and starches, but we also have the largest food processing manufacturing unit in Western Canada to help process these into actual products, and a food processing development center as well that is quite large. So we talked about SVG and the ag tech play. We really think there's a play there. Vertical farming is another one. Companies are choosing Alberta for vertical farming locations to take advantage of a geographical distribution. So think supply chain and logistics for vertical farming there in Alberta. Goodleaf Farms out of Guelph recently chose Alberta as a place to invest. So very similar to what I was saying with energy, we think agriculture, very strong legacy industry where we can grow a critical mass of talent around and attract investment into. Those are our key sectors. We've kind of talked about this stuff on the tech page, but who can leverage tech and industry expertise to be a global solutions provider? We think Alberta can. The brain, Calgary and Edmonton have both overall brain gain. Instead of the opposite of that, obviously, is brain drain. You hear that a lot out of like Toronto, San Francisco, and other places. We think the youthful workforce and the low cost of housing and low cost of living and high quality of life really supports that. And we'll continue to see that brain gain going on. The FinTech Regulatory Sandbox, University of Alberta, and their AI ML programs, and then core strengths in energy, financial services, and healthcare. Haven't talked about healthcare that much, probably stay away from it, but energy and ag and finance, I think, are the ones that are the most compelling to me at this point in time. And so when someone says why Alberta, or when someone's not even thinking about Alberta, these are the reasons that we think they should, and it has to do with things that we already excel in. To repeat a theme that I've said multiple times here. Obviously, clean tech, ag tech, two buzzwords that are getting a lot of investment here in the US. We certainly expect that to happen in Canada. Sustainable fuels, producing low-cost hydrogen, machine learning, artificial intelligence. And I would add fintech to the slide just because I don't think the world of peer-to-peer online value transfer, even with all the black eyes that we're experiencing in the media these days, is going anywhere anytime soon. I don't think it will be uninvented, for lack of a better term. And I think Alberta's forward-facing approach to cryptocurrency, I cringe when I say it, but cryptocurrency is some of the companies, nice little logo page, some of the companies that I've mentioned, Emphasis in the top left, Infosys just down the stream from them, Amazon as well, Pace, the solar project, Goodleaf Farms, the vertical farming company. A lot of investment in 2 years. Invest Alberta's come a long way, and we're kind of doubling down on that and getting ourselves out into the market and doing a lot of work. We lean heavily on service providers to do co-branded events, to help you guys find new business, to help your clients, to do whatever you need on the technical side. If we get stuff about immigration or corporate entity or tricky tax questions, we usually don't try to answer those. We'd rather bring someone in who works on them on a daily basis to answer those technical questions. We are the business development agents. We are the ones out there waving the flag, trying to get attention into the province. I'm based in the Bay Area, traveling all over the US currently to do this, but we're going to have resources on the East Coast here shortly. I have colleagues in Seattle, another one in the Bay Area. So I invite you guys to take us out for coffee. We'll take you out for coffee, get a drink, have a chat. Let us know what's on your mind, feedback about what Alberta looks like to your clients, and however else we can help. I do encourage you to look at relationships with economic development as a long-term thing. If we can't help on one client, doesn't mean we can't help on others. It's nuanced work. Sometimes it's very high level and dare I say it, not helpful, but other times it really moves the meter. So I think we need to develop long-term relations here in the US market, and that's what we're here to do. So I can open it up for questions if anybody has some. And I think I'm supposed to ask the online audience the same question, right?
So when you were saying earlier that they've made it home, those different companies, slide before, so
yeah,
that's just they're adding a location there.
That's correct. They've invested into the province. We're typically measured through job creation and CapEx expenditure or capital expenditure.
Mm-hmm.
So when we help a company through the sales process and then they invest and we can verify what they've done from a hiring point of view or a capital expenditure point of view, then we announce that as a success. And we only do that if we have deep relationships with that company. It's not like we would show up in their office and then make an announcement if they picked it. Later.
Yeah, because I noticed EY is on there, but I didn't see any of the other large accounting firms like ours or Price or anybody. So I wondered.
Well, I think so. I don't have the historical background to know the EY project by heart, but if you certainly have Alberta aspirations, I'm happy to talk to you about that.
Are you finding that people, Tate, are appreciating the today's and tomorrow's Alberta from the historical profile of the province as being so focused on oil and gas and fossil fuels? Is that word getting out? And kind of what's the starting point you find in conversations with people who are thinking about Canada regarding Alberta?
Yeah.
Is that a moving foundation?
So when you're in Calgary, it's kind of like you said, clean tech, excuse me, but they say that in jest. They understand what's coming, and like I think people are very receptive to understanding what Alberta's economy has been built on in the past years, with the caveat that it's probably going to transition into new forms of energy, and having the legacy industry so interested in that space, investing in that space, I think it's super helpful. but there's certainly a defensiveness. I mean, it's historically been an insular facing place that hasn't had investment attraction agents on the ground, hasn't really told their story because they haven't had to, and now they're doing it. And I think the opportunity is or the time is right, I guess, is a better way to say it. And you look at, I mean, I represented BC for 5 years before this. Vancouver's a very expensive place. Toronto's a very expensive place. It's a very competitive place. And Alberta can pull some of that low-hanging fruit over there. It's not that big of a offering difference, value proposition. Speaking from a technological, like software point of view.
When you're talking to U.S. companies that are looking to expand, what are the competitive regions? Is it that looking just in Canada, or are they actually looking globally, and you're having to choose Canada and choose Alberta?
It's a very good question. It's all over the board. So when I was with the UK, they were looking at Europe, and UK was the launch pad. When I was with BC, they're looking at Canada as their first international expansion, and it's kind of like they're testing the waters to do this in other places like LATAM, Africa, Europe, stuff like that. And that was mainly software companies, which is a completely different beast than, say. So one of the questions that we also always ask, so to answer your question specifically, I think the majority of it is they're looking at Canada. We want to be in the office when they're thinking about either one of the coasts, so we can bring Alberta to their attention. My second thought was, well, that's your answer. It'll come to me in a minute.
I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
And what's sort of driving? Is it global expansion to reach new markets, or is it expanding to get access to, for example, top talent? Canada has a more favorable immigration policy. They have a great tax credit.
Yep.
Like, is it driven because to expand offices to benefit the general offices, and also new markets?
Yeah, talent, time zones, and the tax credits, the shred tax credits are generally interesting. Canada has had a bit of a moment over the past 5 years in terms of U.S. companies and their understanding that there's better valuations there, cheaper talent there, not cheaper, better value talent there, can take advantage of some might say a better quality of life as well. So to piggyback on what I said earlier, it's usually like, hey, this is our first international expansion. We're going to do it in Canada. It seems friendly. We're going to test the tires and see how it works here. And also we're going to grow in Canada as well. And then use that as the model to go elsewhere.
And one point that I would add to that companies don't think about very often, that we've got another free trade agreements that the US don't have. And therefore, when you start in Canada, but until you get access to the European Union, a lot of countries in Asia without tariffs, whereby if you just stayed in the US, you would not benefit from that.
Yeah.
Tate, just to follow on my colleague Mary Ellen's comment there, we all work for RSM. There's a number of us here at RSM. We have 3 offices in Alberta, so we're Calgary and Red Deer, so we're heavily invested in that space.
Excellent. I'm happy to hear it. Keen to connect with you and chat about how we can help. Yeah, definitely. We're always happy to cooperate and do events together. If we do a lot of business development, a lot of networking, I think our core business revolves around that. So if you guys have an interest to do something, be it in the Bay Area or down here, definitely reach out and let us know, especially if you're growing in Alberta.
Thank you, Tate.
All right, guys.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
All right. And Tate, those slides are really something we can make available to folks after the event as well. Okay, terrific. All right, so now my pleasure to introduce Delilah Panio from the Toronto Stock Exchange, Vice President of U.S. Capital Formation, based in Southern California. In this role, Delilah advises U.S. companies on the opportunity to list and raise capital on Canada's premier equity markets. Previously, Delilah spent 10 years at TSX and TSX Venture in business development and strategy. She has advised many companies on the going public process and provides an understanding of private and public financing options in Canada and the United States. She's also the founder of Fortuna Funding, which provides practical and intentional guidance on accessing aligned capital, particularly for female founders. She is a frequent speaker and pitch and coach, and recently partnered with UBS and CEO on Project Female Founder. She is currently chair of the funding committee for Women Leaders of Octane and an advisory board member for Maple Business Council, We Global, an innovation studio for women entrepreneurs, and the Allyship, driving change for women in venture capital. She is an activator for Coralus, formerly CEO, and led the 2016 US launch for this financing vehicle for female and non-binary founders. She's also the executive director and co-founder of We Are Enough, a nonprofit that educates women on why and how to invest in women-owned businesses and/or with a gender lens, which will be launching a global campaign next year. Delilah holds an MBA in enterprise development and a BA in English, and has completed a certification as a neuro-linguistic programming NLP master practitioner. Please join me in welcoming Delilah. And you're all set up.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks to Stephen and Rob for inviting me. We've been a member of Maple for many years, and appreciate the support and the opportunity to talk about the cross-border listing process. So this is either going to be a exciting or a depressing presentation, depending on your portfolio and how much cash you have in your accounts right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to whip through a market update of what's been going on in the US and the Canadian markets. So in the US markets, it's no surprise, everybody knows, everyone sees a portfolio of everything is down significantly from last year. Now, it's always hard coming off of a record year, right? I mean, so last year was a record across all financing, listing, IPOs, our portfolios. It was an incredible year in the US and in Canada. And so the drop this year is significant and is being felt quite significantly. So this is the number of IPOs being filed, so down quite a bit. But the real hit in the US is the amount of capital raised in IPOs. So it has. I mean, I don't know if we've ever seen something like this before, but it's been really rough here in the U.S. But the companies that are still active in the public markets are in healthcare and tech, so that's not surprising that still would be. And we can't really talk about what's been happening in the U.S. market without talking about SPAC. So for people who don't know, Special Acquisition Corps, it was one of the main ways that U.S. companies went public last year. Billions and billions of dollars were raised, and that has taken a big hit again this year, including the number of deals that are actually going to be able to go public in the U.S. So what's matters here for any companies that are looking to go public is that there are about 500 SPACs looking for a deal. So these are big shell companies that are looking to take companies public here in the US. So in Canada, just to set the stage, if those who aren't aware, we have a very unique two-tier market in Canada. We have Toronto Stock Exchange for more senior companies, and then we uniquely have TSX Venture Exchange, which is one of the only regulated public venture capital markets in the world. And so we have this really incredible opportunity for companies to come early stage on TSX Venture, graduate up to TSX, and then for US companies especially look at dual listing on the US exchange, which I'll touch on in a moment. So what's been happening in Canada, capital raise also down, not as significant as a drop, but certainly our IPO window, our market has been closed most of this year as well. But there are still companies that are raising capital and going public through our TSX through the TSX Venture Exchange. In terms of new listings, again, down, but not as big of a drop from the US. And so again, we have a marketplace in Canada that is very much about small and micro cap companies accessing the public markets. We have 170-year history. We just celebrated our birthday a couple of weeks ago. So 170 years of taking public very early stage pre-revenue. Think about our history in Canada as a mining and oil and gas franchise. We still are the biggest mining market in the world. So about 50% of every dollar raised globally in mining comes through our market. So that's a big deal. But in the last 20 years, we've had a significant diversification of our stock list. So we're talking about tech, innovation, life sciences, all the sort of emerging sectors. Our incubator program from venture to TSX is working very well. So even this year, we still have had a number of companies that were still executing on their business plans, still doing well despite the market conditions, and we're able to graduate up to TSX. So what does this mean for U.S. companies? So as Stephen mentioned, I'm based in Southern California. I am a Canadian, and I'm from Saskatchewan. If there's any other prairie kids in the room here or online, I'll be going there next week. But I have the incredible opportunity to represent the Canadian capital markets and be marketing to U.S. companies as a value proposition for them to access capital. And I also find winter highly unnecessary, and so and none of my colleagues in Toronto and Alberta like me on the calls, especially right now. So how do you put this into context? Where do we fit in? So at the end of the day, if you are a private company looking to access growth capital, or you're an investor in any of these companies, for those in the room, we fit into the North American equity landscape in a very unique way that other companies in other markets don't really think about. So, if you look at the typical ecosystem of raising capital as a private company, going from founders, friends and family, angel investor, venture capital, hoping to be acquired, and or doing a big IPO on NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange. That is the typical trajectory of a US company. That's kind of what they're thinking about. But I invite companies and I educate them on opening, their mindset to think about that there may be other options that are more relevant and more attractive, including our markets. So we really play at TSX Venture Exchange, very early stage. Like I said, we even list pre-revenue companies, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So if you look at the difference between the two markets is, so TSX, again, average market cap about 2 billion, still small cap relevant to the US markets, right? A $2 billion company is small in the US, but again, we're very, very good at small public companies in Canada. But the venture exchange, again, uniquely, so the average market cap of companies coming to our market, there are more in like the 40 to 75 million. So this is true venture capital raising. Average finances are $5 million. So in the US, the equivalent, you'd be on the OTC market, which is unregulated, or you might be able to qualify for early stage NASDAQ, which a lot of companies did last year. But the challenge with NASDAQ or NYSE is that you have to maintain a share price. And that's very hard to do, especially in markets like this. And so we don't have those kind of restrictions on our markets. So the key about this slide is just that we're really tailored to small public companies. So here, this puts it into great perspective. If you're a $1 billion technology company and you're trading in the US, you're number 418. So there's a lot of companies that are way bigger than you as a $1 billion tech company. If you're a $1 billion tech company, you're trading on TSX, you're number 23. So why does that matter? What is that about? What that means is you are a bigger fish in a smaller pond, so you're getting more analyst coverage, you're getting access to bigger institutional investors, you're getting more exposure in our market. And so it really helps you to kind of, get your training wheels on, if you will, on our market, and then, eventually going to the bigger markets. So we are a true stepping stone to the US markets, and that is really our true value proposition for early stage companies in the US. So if you're a high growth company raising your Series A, Series B, sort of that $10 million plus, and so you're sitting here, you have options now. You can think, I'm going to continue down the private venture capital route, which has its pros and its cons. The biggest cons are control. As soon as you're raising your Series B, you're basically losing control of your company because you have pref share guys now on your cap table, right? So you have the VCs are taking board positions. They dictate your exit. They dictate your liquidity event. When you go public at an earlier stage, for example, on TSX Venture, you actually maintain greater control because you only have to float 20% of your company with the public, and everyone's a common shareholder. So you, as the founders, your management team, your current investors, you actually significantly can control your company a lot longer than if you go down the venture capital route. So a typical path that a lot of companies in the US are following is starting on TSX Venture Exchange, do some non-dilutive rounds of capital, graduate to TSX, and then when you're big enough, and the real word is when you're relevant enough, then you can dual list onto NASDAQ and NY or NYSE. We have a unique agreement between the two countries that no other market has with the US. It's called the multi-jurisdiction disclosure system. If you are trading on our markets for 1 year, you can then dual list onto a US exchange without having to do an S1 and all the cost and time it takes to go public in the US. They will take your disclosure documents that you file in Canada as part, and it's just a much more streamlined path. So why does this matter to companies, or how do you think about it? So if you are a founder, or if you know founders of companies, or you're investors in companies, then you have to think about, does your company have a reason to be public? So that's the first thing that you should be thinking about. Most companies should not go public. It's a big deal to be a public company. It's time, cost, etc. But if you have the reason to be public, and what are those reasons? Access to capital. It's permanent capital. In theory, it's unlimited capital. Acquisition currency, probably the number one reason why you'd go public early is, listen, if you're a great public company right now, and you can use your stock as currency, there's a lot of cheap companies to buy right now, right? There's really a lot of opportunity if you were public versus having to raise the capital privately to then go make acquisitions, which can be very expensive. Diversifying your shareholder base, as I said, if you want to make everyone a common shareholder to maintain control. True stock incentives for your employees, so you have real pathway to liquidity, and then just the credibility and exposure of being on a stock exchange. Second thing I would think is, are you ready to go public? This is a big deal, because we're looking for management team, public company CFO, moving from an advisory board to a public company board of directors. You need 2 years of audited financial statements, internal controls. Knowing that the CEO's time will be spent on investor relations, so who's building the company, and then the big one is transparency. Are you ready to have all your financials out into the public? And there's pros and cons to that as well. So just thinking about, are you ready to be a public company? And then you meet our listing requirements. As I said, we uniquely in Canada, in our market, we list pre-revenue companies, but we're looking for working capital, revenue, net tangible assets. Very different than the US markets, where on NASDAQ or New York, you have to, they're looking for market cap requirements, share price, shareholder equity. So we have, our requirements are based on the financial fundamentals of the company, which is really a very big difference, and helps smaller companies be able to go public. We do have our guide to listing on our website, us.tsx.com. But then the last point I'll make on this part is that, what is the reality of your deal getting done today? Because you can have every reason to go public, you can be ready, you can meet our requirements, but can investment bankers in Canada sell your deal to their investor base, which are retail and institutional? And that, of course, the big answer is that depends on what the markets are. So obviously, who I was talking to last year, who I'm talking to this year, is a very, very big difference. And so the key for all this is understanding the markets and when's the right timing. And as we know, the markets always come back. So they will come back. We just don't know the timing of it. But this is the time to be ready. So if we look about what's getting financed, so this, last year, this looked very different. It was tech, it was life science, it was clean tech, et cetera. Not surprising, mining is at the top of the list for financing. So the good news about the Canadian markets, and you saw the reason why we didn't have as big of a drop in financing and IPOs is because we have mining companies and energy companies, clean energy companies still coming to the market. So very diverse stock list. So what that means for you is that whether you're an investor or a company looking to come to the market, is that there is access across all of the sectors. So just a few examples, so we've already had, so typically we have 10 to 15 US companies going public. Last year we had a record at 25. We're going to be close to 20 this year. What's interesting is, again, they're mostly on TSX Venture, and they're mostly early stage tech, clean energy companies, a couple of mining companies there. One of my companies out of Austin, Inspire Semiconductor, listed recently. We've had just really interesting, again, diverse companies looking at this market. And again, why are US companies looking at our market? Especially, we are in the biggest capital market in the world. So it seems really actually insane. But there's the two big things that I would say about that are, the private capital markets aren't necessarily working for the reasons I talked about around control. A lot of sophisticated management teams already know how to build their company. They don't want the control of the venture capital. So they want to control their company very differently. And I would also say that the public markets in the US do not serve the early stage companies. Used to, back in the day, where Microsoft and companies like that did small cap IPOs. Now you need to be $1 billion company to think about really relevantly accessing and being successful in the US public markets. So in our market, we serve those companies. So just a couple of interesting companies. This is, again, just room to think about how do you use public venture capital. You come to our market at an early stage. The blue dots are acquisitions. So this company has done several acquisitions. They've done several financings, and they follow the trajectory. And this company will be, will graduate to TSX. This one is a great company out of New York that, listed on venture, dual listed on NASDAQ, graduated to TSX, again, did financings and acquisitions along the way. So this is a very different profile of how US public companies look. So last slide, again, this is just an opportune time to explore all the capital raising options, thinking about going public, because it takes 9 to 12 months to go public. So this is actually a really good time to be getting ready. All the things, the legal audits, with our legal and audit friends in the room here, build those relationships and look at exploring the different ways of going public, including through our capital pool company program. So that's it for TSX. I know that this is a diverse audience, so hopefully that was relevant to most of you. But I'm happy to answer any questions online. Rob, if there's anybody online or anybody here.
Typically, Delilah, how long is
Questions online? Haven't seen any yet, but yeah. So anyone online that has a question, please drop it in the Q&A.
How long does a company stay on TSX Venture before they graduate? Is there, if they do, typically how long is that?
So yeah, the question for those online is how long does a company typically stay on venture before graduating? That's a big depends, right? Depends on markets, depend on how well the company's executing. I'd say that the companies who are on a real growth trajectory are on there for maybe a couple of years, graduated to TSX. And then so for US companies, the thought should be, I want to be on NASDAQ in 3 to 5 years from now. And how do we get there? You can go the private route or our route. And so that can be like a path that within 3 to 5 years you can be on NASDAQ.
Any California companies that you want to highlight, maybe as an example?
Yeah. So we had Sabio listed last year. They're an ad tech company here. I actually have several prospects right now out of LA. I am doing an LA roadshow in February. I have several in the pipeline that, would have gone this year, a couple that were in the NFT space. Remember when NFTs were a thing? Who remembers that last year? So had several companies, one great one here in LA, and that's just, gone away. Crypto was obviously a big momentum play. We just have an investor base in Canada uniquely and weirdly for Americans to wrap their heads around, because they think of Canadians as being so conservative, especially financially. But we have an investor base that's really interested in high risk, high growth, emerging sectors. It's like you get to be the venture capitalist. You get to get in on these companies at a really early stage and hopefully ride the success wave. So whether, last year, obviously, crypto, psychedelics, obviously we led the cannabis boom years ago when that was happening. So when I look to next year, it's like, where am I putting my efforts into next year, trying to guess where those momentum plays are going to be. In my mind, especially in the US, there's no doubt anything around clean energy, hydrogen, batteries, those kind of minerals, electric vehicles, because everybody in Canada knows the amount of money that's being poured into the clean energy sector in the US, right? The federal government is pouring tons of money in. There's going to be so many earlier stage companies that are getting financed that are going to be looking for their next round. And because, especially here in California, driven by legislation and, there's just a huge momentum here in that sector. And then anything in like ag tech, anything around food security, everybody knows where that's all going. And so to get in on those companies, so I actually have a really great company out of Phoenix and organic energy drinks. So anything in that kind of, and we've had plant-based companies come to our market, food companies. So those sectors that, again, think about retail investors that they get it, right? It's like when you're showing them a deal, it's like, oh, I get that. I know that that's going to be a big deal in the coming years, and they want to bet on those companies. Yes.
I'm just curious, it was very interesting when you talk about very early stage companies. Can you give some examples of something that's really early stage, meaning that something was very compelling about the idea, but it didn't necessarily get all the typical investment fundamentals, just to get a context of what that may look like?
Yeah, so if you just think about different sectors that are growing or emerging that investors want to get in on. So think about like crypto. but a lot of crypto companies in the last 5 years, people want to get out. The ones that have been successful have been the platforms, some of the Bitcoin miners. We listed in Canada the first Bitcoin ETFs in the world. So again, people don't think about Canada as being that, progressive and innovative in those areas, but from a financial markets, we have always been. So we've wrapped our head around that. I mean, psychedelic companies, that had a big push last year. Again, early stage, pre-revenue. The challenge with psychedelics is that investors wrongly associated with the cannabis sector and think it's going to be another cannabis boom. But cannabis, that's consumer products, right? That's like, you're farming, you're developing products to be sold to consumers, whereas psychedelics is a biotech. This is a biotech play, right? And they're waiting for FDA approval. So I would say it's those kind of companies that are like really early stage. The sectors are early stage. They're emerging. Esports, gaming, like all those things that companies are in development, don't have revenue yet. There is often an appetite for that. Certainly a lot of the clean energy stuff, a lot of that's still pre-revenue, right? And so you can list on our markets because investors get the potential of that future.
I just mentioned that because we're very involved in Canada's startup visa program from an innovation perspective. And so there are a lot of cool companies, and I think that's just an interesting opportunity.
Yes.
Going to think about.
Yeah. The real is shifting the mindset in the US here that there's another option outside of private venture capital, right? And again, I'm very passionate because you've heard my bio. I work with a lot of female founders. I mentor a lot of early stage companies around. You've got to know all of your options. And if you're only thinking that, I'm going to get angel VC and sell my company for a huge multiple, like statistically that happens to almost nobody, right? And so you've got to look at your options. And again, this isn't the right fit for a lot of companies because again, most companies should go public. Most US companies shouldn't go public in Canada, but for the right ones, like in some of those sectors I was talking about, at least explore it, right? So I would encourage, to mention to some of your companies that at least explore this idea because it might actually be the right fit for them. Like the tech, especially the tech guys I talk to, the ones that are listing, they're clear. They're like, I don't want venture capital. I don't want to go. I've seen that movie before. I want to control my company. I have an aggressive acquisition strategy, so I want to be able to use my stock, and I want to get to NASDAQ. And this is definitely a path.
Given your work with female founders and technology, what kind of profile does TSX Venture have? And TSX, if you look at it through a diversity lens compared to the U.S. market, is there a?
It's equally terrible.
Yeah.
Equally terrible. Yeah, we have 3,000 companies, and I think we have 100 women CEOs. It's very similar to the U.S. I mean, last year was a record year for U.S. Women-led IPOs, but there were 12 out of 1,000, and that was a record year. So yeah, so I could talk about this all day, but the people like ask me like, why do not more women take their companies public? The practical reality is for you to be able to go public in the U.S., you have to have raised a lot of venture capital. Women currently get 2% of venture capital in this country. So you're not even able to access that venture capital to go public. And you can't get the venture capital if you haven't gotten the angel investor round. You don't get the angel money if you don't have friends and family. Right. So that critical first round friends and family money that most women, and certainly women of color, do not have access to wealthy friends and family. It's just not their network. So it's basically from the beginning of the ecosystem right all the way through. The system is significantly set up to not include women, and especially women of color. And so I do a little bit of work along all those paths. But it is something that needs to be addressed because when companies go public, think about all that exit money that goes to the founders. That they go then invest in new companies. Think about all the employees. Think about everybody who benefits from that. And so I'm very passionate about helping more women to get to that stage. But it literally starts at the friends and family money, and then the angel, and then the venture capital, and then going public.
Thank you, Delilah.
Okay.
Was that content we can share with the network too?
Yes.
Yep, fantastic. All right, folks, we're just about at the end today. I just wanted to give you a quick update on what's coming. Our next event will actually be in Vancouver. Our BC chapter is holding a member mixer at Global Container Terminals. So shifting our focus to supply chain. One of our executive members is Marko Dakovic, who is Vice President of Government Affairs for Global Container Terminals, and he's going to be hosting a tour of their facility, and there'll be additional discussion around that. So there'll be information coming out in the coming weeks, and that's available to anybody who will be in the area as well as our local community. And then we're starting now on our first quarter programming for 2023. We will be in Ontario and Toronto on February 16th for our next event. More details to come soon on that. Early March in Denver, followed by either Los Angeles or Orange County for our SoCal chapter, working with the province of Quebec. And then our April month will be events with New York and another event with BC. So as we grow our network, you're going to see this opportunity to connect with different parts of our community throughout Canada, United States. And with that in mind, if you're not currently a member of Maple, I encourage you to take a look at what we offer. Hopefully today was a good window on the type of content and networking that we provide. As I like to say, let's get out of our swim lanes. We all have our sector-focused networking. What we can do together is share thought leadership, ideas, contacts across sectors, and find some of those inspirations and those looks around the corner that might create a new business opportunity, and also through the variety of markets that are now part of our growing Maple community. So with that, thanks very much for joining us here at RSM. Thank you again, RSM, for hosting us. Really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone online for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.